Hello everyone, this is Ishmaru again. I'm going to just do another installment of the behind the scenes of RWBY Fangame. This one I just wanted to kind of go over some questions that I had over the course of working on this, and I figured I would just share it so everyone understands the intents and everything. And maybe I'll play a little bit of arcade mode for those who haven't seen the game. So let's go bring that up. I'll of course play with Rice. So I guess let me start here. So why RWBY? So I have worked on several games in the past, and this is my first official fan game based on anything. I have worked on games that are inspired by previous games, such as Annex being inspired from Command & Conquer, and Terra being inspired by StarCraft, and Luna heavily influenced by Jet Force Gemini. But this is the first time actually directly using someone else's IP. And so why did I choose this? Well, RWBY has been a series that I've kind of watched since the early days of the Red trailer, and it's always kind of captivated me. One of my little known facts about me, I went to art and animation school, and one of my dreams was to actually start my own web series, very anime action oriented, and it kind of never happened. So instead, I kind of went down the path of going into game development because I kind of started getting interested more in interactive, as well as kind of finding doing animation was a lot more complex to me. I was heavily based on having a plan and storyboard and, of course, writing and dialogue. It just seemed a little too daunting, and to me, games seemed a lot easier to get a product out that's feasible and somewhat complete state than it was for an animation, so I kind of dropped that. And then I kind of discovered this little web series. I saw some of Monty's work with the Dead Fantasy series, but this is the first kind of series where I saw like an actual, like really watched it from the beginning and was captivated by the characters. And I've always kind of wanted to work with either this IP or one of my other biggest ones, which is Gundam. And as much as I wanted to work on either of them, I didn't think it was kind of feasible with possibly getting cease and desist, as well as other legal problems. Well, when I started, before I started working on this, I don't remember exactly where I had seen this, but I actually saw a copy of the rights, or at least the user agreement for people using Rooster Teeth content. And I took a look at it, and it seemed that there's no issue doing a fan game as long as I'm not collecting profits and claiming the IP as my own, as well as I also need to just distinguish that they have no association with this product. And the other issue was, the series for me always kind of came across as being a very game-oriented series where like the entire world is a video game in and of itself. With the concept of aura, the concept of even being able to see it on a digital display, as seen in Volume 3, or even in the early volumes when they're doing their training practices at Beacon. And I kind of was surprised to see that, of course, aside from Grim Eclipse and that Chinese mobile game, not really seeing much of RWBY as a video game. And the even bigger shock was having, especially with RWBY, having such a unique fighting style, using her gun to propel herself forward and to switching her ammo types as seen in the trailer. None of the games really reflected that. Weiss is supposed to use more than just ice dust, but yet she pretty much, outside of some events in Volume 2, if I recall, and maybe something very rarely here and there, but none of the games have her doing anything. She only uses ice in Grim Eclipse, and now in the recently released Aerofell, she only uses ice dust. So I kind of wanted to experiment and see if a game could have some of these mechanics more like the show. So see here, I'm use her little propulsion with her gun. And So this is basically just started as a big experiment, really. It wasn't intended to be a full-fledged game. RWBY was the only one in the game at first, because it was really supposed to be just RWBY and a bunch of Grimm fight till you die, and then you get a score based on how well you did. And I started building off that, and I was actually pretty impressed. So, as I mentioned some of my earlier projects, they're very much gun-based. I never really did anything with melee combat, and it's always been something I've never really excelled in, whether as playing or with creating these types of games. So this was kind of a new venture, and I kind of was excited to try something new, but yet I still had an idea of how I would have gone about building this. I guess that would lead to one of the questions I got a lot was, why did I do this on Clickteam Fusion as opposed to like Unity, Unreal, etc. And it was really just comes down to, with my experience with what I could animate, really just seemed the only one plausible. Sure there's tutorials online, and I'm sure there's like things like Mugen and stuff like that, but in terms of how I would actually take models, turn them into sprites, to actually get them into a playable game that I felt would be relatively digestible for an actual final product. See, with like actual fighter games, like the games you see with the ArcSoft, with BlazBlue, Cross Tag, that's an insanely complicated system of combat mechanics I couldn't even begin to grasp, because I'm not really a fighting game player. And that's kind of the main reason why I strayed away from Mugen, because they're specifically built to build 101 fighter game. Maybe you could do something like tag outs and stuff like that, but still, it's hundreds of moves. You have to constantly balance them out with kind of like this rock, paper, scissors mechanic, and I just didn't feel that I something I can actually do. And one of the major goals of this project specifically was to make something that was plausible. And that kind of leads me as to why it was done in 2D as opposed to 3D, aside from the engine, because I did have CopperCube experience, and maybe I could have done something in CopperCube. But when it comes to creating animations for video games in 3D as opposed to my sprites, as you see here, there's a very special rule set you have to follow with the bone structure, which is you have to have every single vertex assigned to a bone. And that kind of felt limiting with how I would animate. I honestly didn't know how I would do more complex animations in a video game, such as transformations of crescent rows, constantly switching out her modules. As you see here, just moments where she kind of has it. It's visible, it's not visible. Having her semblance, for example, this, like didn't have a grasp on how exactly I would pull it off. Whereas, as opposed to me having sprites, I can basically just turn on or off different models, different armatures, and just mount on a fly. And since it's all pre-rendered, it doesn't really affect the gameplay at all. So it's not something I have to code in to deal with. It's just in the animation. That's really the ultimate reason why I went with a 2D brawler as opposed to a 3D one. It's really just, I wanted something feasible. That's the biggest takeaway from why I did what I did, is I wanted something that I can do by myself. It wasn't one of the things that I've seen fellow developers do is dream too big. And while that's a wonderful thing to dream, I see a lot of projects that either die too early or just never really take off because they just have way more than they can do. And that's not something I want here. You can see that a lot with RWBY. If you go on Game Jolt or Itch, there's a small graveyard of game projects that never really took off because they dreamed way too big. In fact, I know one of the biggest requests was to have a RWBY game where it's an open world 3D, and there was an attempt. I can't name elude me, but there was a modest attempt, and they got a lot done. I mean, there's no story. There's only like Beowulfs and Nethermoors and a boss Nethermoor. It was open world. You can explore And this, for some reason, this game decided to have a city of Patch and the surrounding area. Like you could visit Forever Fall, and you could visit a desert area, a winter forest area. And that was cool, but it was, you can tell the animations were done using either Maximo or some sort of service that have not pre-rendered, but pre-created animation libraries, because their animations doesn't really follow the character personalities. And it still was pretty basic. You had your light attack, you had your heavy attacks. You basically just spam either one. Granted, I guess you can say that is how it is here. But still, like, I can do like combos where there's an actual tactical advantage of doing certain moves over other moves, where the other one kind of felt like just spam whichever one comes into play. And ultimately, the project just kind of ended. They released a concept, which was cool. It never really took off. And once again, it's just, way too much. I think the other reason, too, is they were turned off with the direction the series went. And I'm not going to get into that, but I really wanted to do something that was plausible. So my initial goal was really just basically what I'm playing now, which is the arcade mode, and just fighting endless hordes of Grim. As I got enough done, I saw that there was enough potential there to actually explore a story, and I actually started to get a story idea together that seemed worthwhile and not out of scope. So that's when I started to work on the story mode. And that's basically where I kind of took it from there. Excuse me, it's a little tough to play a game and talk at the same time. I'm trying to do both, and I'm failing at both miserably. So with another question I kind of got was, why did I kind of release the game in segments? Because I know that that's one of the major reasons why the game didn't really take off, especially in the beginning, because really they just got a glorified tech demo. With the concept of having something released, I never knew what life was going to take. I don't know if I ever was going to get a cease and desist. I don't know if I would eventually kind of lose interest in working on this. There's a lot of factors, especially in the early days. So I kind of had this piece early and consistently, and kind of have this play, like, game was basically just in a constant state of play test. My biggest fear really was to basically spend months to years working on something and finally release it, and everyone hates it because it's not fun. So I kind of felt that if I released it early, I can get early feedback, make changes, and try to make this the best that I can make, because honestly, I didn't play these kind of games, so I needed that feedback to know that I'm doing something good. Now with the other question I get, and it's not really a question so much as a comment, not everyone really appreciates the retro art style, and I get that. I'm not expecting everyone to love it. But the reason why I personally do it is I grew up in the era of N64 and PlayStation 1. So me, my nostalgia is for these early low poly models. And while high fidelity models are great, and I definitely don't dislike modern games, I've always kind of felt that video games should be more based on fantasy. I feel like real life, lifelike as possible, is kind of off. Life is hard. And I kind of want games to help me escape from life sometimes. And having it, even cartoons, having them try to match reality, match real physics, and the more realistic they got, the less interested I kind of got into it. So that's why I kind of have this kind of art style. Plus, honestly, there is an element of it's easier to animate, easier to put together. I am working by myself, of trying to model characters from the RWBY series, all the characters I have to do, all the Grim, from scratch, and keep it as high fidelity as possible with animating things like fingers, and it's just too much. And it goes back down to, would the game even be done if I had to do that much effort? it sounds lazy, but I think it's trying to play it smart. I eventually got some help, and I appreciate any help that I have gotten, but I couldn't guarantee anything. So I had to go build everything off the assumption that it would always be just me. Now, I know some people have asked why, with the availability of Grim Eclipse models, there's all sorts of MMD models that people have already made. There's, now there's RFL models and Amity Arena. So a lot of people have commented, why couldn't I have just used those? It's still my game, whether I'm using the RWBY IP or not. And I'm an artist, whether lately I've been doing more programming than art. Keep that inside. I enjoy art. I enjoy animating. I really wanted to actually make the content. I wanted something to stand, even if it is RWBY's IP, to stand out my game from even the series in some level. It's a different AU. I mean, there's no Salem, there's no destruction of beacons, therefore there's no God, no ever after or anything like that. So why not have something unique to also kind of visually remind people that this is still something different? So that's really comes down to it. I enjoy doing this. And honestly, I know people want to know what the plans are for the future of this game. I'm going to continue working on story mode. I've been listening to feedback, so when I started this project, I wasn't really all that interested in having characters outside of RWBY. The reason, that's the question I get. Why RWBY specifically? Oh, and next game over. Why RWBY? Something about her character. Like, I've always gravitated towards kind of the goofy, but can be serious in combat kind of characters, like Kenshin Himura from, not the Samurai X series, but from his actual Kenshin series, and, Vash the Stampede kind of characters. They're kind of just lovable goofballs, and that's what I gravitated towards with RWBY. She's always has this smile on her face, always jokes around. She's the kind of girl to save the world at, just before dinner, and then come back to binge watch, a comic book series about saving the world. Like, I love that. And I felt there was a lot of potential with some of her quirkiness that the series could have focused on, and it kind of dropped the ball with, in my opinion. And that's not me just crapping on the series. I love RWBY. I wouldn't be spending so much of my life working on this if I dislike RWBY. So I get that. There's only so much they can do, and that's one of the reasons why I dropped the Salem plotline, because I wanted to give more attention to the characters and less on world-ending scenario. So because of that, I've always envisioned this game to kind of be something, not gameplay-wise, but in terms of how Kingdom Hearts work, where it's, the Sora, Donald, Goofy are the characters of the story, but you play as Sora. Donald and Goofy are your support, and that's kind of how I originally envisioned Weiss, Blake, and Yang. Just kind of be your supports to get through the storyline. And on some level, will still be some of that, but I know that a lot of people really enjoy Blake, Yang, and Weiss and want to play as them. So I listened to the polls, and I am slowly working on trying to change the game where at least you'd be able to swap out control. RWBY would be controlled by an AI, and you can play as Weiss. But that still means that the idea of the game, still the level up, everything's still going to be focused on RWBY. That's not going to change. I'm not planning on giving a separate storyline, at least right now. I can never tell the future. See how things go. Maybe if the game gets popular enough, maybe if there's enough demand for it, we'll see. Maybe if I have a good idea. But as of right now, RWBY is the main character. And she'll be the character you're intended to play as, but I'll give you the ability to swap her out and do something different. Oh, now we're getting to the final boss. This went faster than I thought. So the last item I wanted to just mention, the game is, I'm not really a person who's good at advertising. I'm not really a writer. I'm not claiming to... I'm not doing this AU because I necessarily want to show protest or prove to anyone that I can do better. And I think I have gotten comments that I guess people have gotten and interpreted that. So I just want to make that clear. That's not my intent here. I honestly went with a completely different AU because generally when you jump from mediums to medium, it doesn't necessarily translate well every time. For example, like the Warcraft movie. It's not like necessarily it's a bad movie, but it's different. When you're playing a game, you are in control of certain elements. You are expected to have certain things like power fantasy, and it's harder. Like it can work really well to do that, but it's hard to really translate. And I think that's one of the reasons why the actual games or Fangames had a hard time with RWBY, is primarily trying to fit what the expectation is to the output. So I wanted to take the core of the show, alter it where I can really make the world based on the game really fit the game itself, instead of necessarily trying to fit the story into a game. So that's really the ultimate reasons behind making this an AU. And I think, for the better or for worse, this game works specifically for its AU. I'm not necessarily going to pretend that I'm the greatest writer in the world, but I don't think this game would have been as good if I tried to fit it into the series. And honestly, I'm happy with that. I'm kind of okay with it. Plus, it gives me a chance to explore interesting things that the show really couldn't. RWBY being able to customize her weapon, or possibly playing with the ship of White Rose, or playing with some ideas that came about from Grim Eclipse itself, but didn't happen that way. Play with Merlot's character. What if he wasn't just a straight up evil mad scientist? What if Cinder's life went differently and she wound up being a more political role, and things like that. And it gives me a lot of wiggle room and kind of fun ideas to play with. So I think that's probably everything I wanted to cover. So let me know if you like these kind of things, and maybe we can definitely talk more about this game or some of my other projects. Well, thank you for listening.